In this video, I'm going to be showing you how you can turn your synth into an electric guitar that sounds something like this. This was something I created for a competition, so the sound I made was inspired by one of the presets we had to use. I've left a download to the preset I'll be starting with if you want to follow along. That being said, this video will be a breakdown of how I turned that preset into a more believable guitar lead and not a step-by-step recreation. You should still be able to follow along, but I've given free and paid alternatives to all the plugins I use since most people won't have the same plugins. First thing I wanted to do was revamp the distortion. Normally I'd stick with the distortion built into the synth, but I couldn't really mimic the sound of a guitar amp that well, so I ended up putting the same simulator by overal on instead. You can also check out other plugins like Guitar Rig, Neural DSP, or Amplitude if you're looking for a plugin with more DLC than an EA game. But if you don't want to spend money on plugins, Ignite Amps offers a lot of free plugins that I'd recommend. Also, you can obviously use regular distortion, but that won't give you the same guitar amp tone if that's what you're looking for. Once you find the plugin you want to use, I'd really try and spend the time to dial in the tone you want. This will be the most defining part of the lead, so make sure you're really comfortable with the sound you have before moving on. After adding distortion, my lead ended up sounding a bit like this. I was thinking of stopping here, but I still felt like the lead felt a bit bland, so I decided to try and make it a bit more expressive, like a real guitar. First thing I set up is a way to get pitch bends and vibrato. This is something that can make any synth a bit more interesting, but it's almost necessary if you want to recreate the sound of somebody sliding across a fretboard or bending the strings like you would on a guitar. Normally, I'd just suggest automating the pitch wheel on certain notes, but I honestly found that to be a bit slow, tedious, and kind of unnecessary, so instead, I used both the pitch wheel and the glide notes. If I wanted to do any quick slides or add vibrato on notes, I'd just overlap the notes to create a glide. I set the glide knob to about halfway at 0.1 seconds to get something that sounds like this. If you want to do longer and more precise bends, you can use the pitch wheel and draw in automations to get something like this. After getting the pitch bends down, I decided to link the velocity to how bright the notes were. This gave me a way to play long sustained notes or softer plucks without needing to automate anything. To keep this fairly simple, I just linked the velocity to a low pass filter so that low velocity notes sounded like this, and higher velocity would sound something like this. If you want to link it to the volume too, you can, but I found that this was good enough for what I wanted. Another big thing about guitar is how notes sustain and being able to mute strings with your palm. This was a pretty simple thing to recreate by just automating the release time of notes so you can control how long it sustains and mute strings when needed. This was pretty helpful to cut out certain notes so they don't play out too long. If you don't play guitar, you may not realize this, but depending on where you pluck the string, the timbre and harmonics of notes will be completely different. I couldn't find a good way to perfectly recreate this, but after trying out different ideas, I found that Formant shifting notes can give you a similar effect. I use the Melda Auto-Tune as a Formant shifter because it's free, but you should be able to get the same effect with plugins like Alter Boy or other Formant shifters. Just make sure to put this before the distortion so it doesn't mess up the tone. After I got the sound I wanted, I tried out using Unison to mimic the sound of a multi-tracked guitar. I set the main oscillator to these settings, then to be able to blend between the detuned and normal lead, I went into the Advanced tab and automated the Unison blend. I also set the detuned stack to power chord, which made it sound like this. Once I had all of that, all I really did was add a few effects to it. This will completely depend on the type of sound you want, but after the amp I used OTT to get a more compressed, fuller sound. Then I added another distortion that gave it a bit more high-end grit and helped it cut through the mix a bit more. Then I added a delay and reverb to give it a bit more depth. Once you have everything set up, you should be able to create a more convincing guitar solo. Here's an example of what I was able to do in this track. I've left the piano roll and automations visible so you can see how I used everything together if you want to try and recreate it in your own projects.